All right, hello students. This is Ms. Favreau. I'm bringing you our second lesson with a special guest, a friend of mine who has been joining me doing these lessons. Usually we're in person and she shares her story with all of you. We've been doing this since 2016, I believe.
Or 15, I'm not sure.
We've been doing it a long time together, and I think it's really important as we're talking about alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs that you really hear a personal story of what a student went through and how his family was impacted. We know it's not the person alone who struggles with addiction or substance use that's impacted, right? It affects the whole family and it has that ripple effect. And so I'm very pleased and honored that I continue to have my friend Jana Hoffman here, and she is going to share her story with all of you. All right, Jana, take it away.
All right, well, like Ms. Favreau said, I'm Jana Hoffman. I am a nurse for St. Peter's Health Partners, but I'm also a parent, and I'd like to read you a story. To celebrate the end of junior year, my son Travis Hilton went to an unsupervised party at a friend's house where someone got injured and both an ambulance and the police were called. The kid who lived at the house and another boy left in the ambulance, leaving Travis and two others alone. They were all visibly drunk, the beer cans were in plain sight, and rather than arresting all of them for underage drinking or calling the parents, the officer ordered the boys to leave as the owner of the home had just left in the ambulance. Travis was then stopped a mile down the road by the same officer and charged with DWI. Travis lost his license for a year, lost his job, had to pay the DMV $1,000, had to pay the court $250, and he had to pay his lawyer $1,500. Travis was dependent on me and his friends for rides. It limited where he could work, so finding a new job was next to impossible. Being able to take your girlfriend out on a date with no money was hard for Travis. He was left home alone a lot due to my work and school schedule. He was 18, so I mistakenly thought he was responsible enough, but he turned my apartment into a frat house and we were evicted. Travis finally graduated from Columbia in 2011, and he went to Jamestown Community College to become a gym teacher. Being in Jamestown gave him an opportunity to reconnect with his dad, but once in Jamestown, he was still screwing up because he was cutting class and driving 400 miles back here to be with his friends. He failed several classes the first 2 semesters, and the summer of 2012 was spent here hanging out, unable to find a job. I promised him that if he got a job and passed all of his classes, he could come back here and go to Hudson Valley next semester. He got a job the first week upon arriving to school and was focusing on school. My mother visited him a month into the semester, and he was very excited about one class in particular. She noticed such a change in him. She really thought he had turned a corner and was finally becoming a responsible young man. He had to come home to go to court for a speeding ticket in October. Since it was close to Columbus Day, he stayed the weekend and got to see most of his friends. It was the last time anyone from back here saw him alive. On November 10th, 2012, after a nice afternoon of Facebooking and Instagram, Travis's dad and stepmother left for a few hours in the early evening. Travis opened a full bottle of Jim Beam whiskey and proceeded to drink it. His 16-year-old brother watched him drink a few ounces of it before he too left, not realizing that Travis had intended to drink it all in the time their dad would be gone. When they all returned home a few hours later, Travis was found unresponsive. Only a few ounces were left in the bottle. At first, they were not overly concerned, for he had done this once before, I later learned. They just put him to bed and he slept it off. But this time, when they put him to bed, he started vomiting and stopped breathing. They called 911, but it was too late. They lived so far from town, it took the ambulance 20 minutes to get to their house. They worked on him at the ER, but could not save him. We later learned that his blood alcohol content was 0.38, almost 5 times the legal limit of 0.08. Travis leaves behind 2 sisters and 2 brothers. two nieces he never got to meet, and a nephew, a father who has had two heart attacks since losing Trav, a grandmother who feels the loss of him more deeply than that of her own husband's passing, and a mother who's trying to get together and be brave for her entire family so we don't all fall apart. When you want to take a drink or two or 10, think about this true story and think again.
So Jana, I say I'm so honored and privileged that you've done this work with me, but I can only imagine it doesn't really get any easier, and it's such a heartbreaking thing, the reason that we have connected. And we're just looking at, Travis's passing was last week, and
8 years.
8 years now.
Still boggles our minds that it's been that long. A new thing that I've just learned is my daughter, who's 5 years older than Travis, and at his funeral we found out that he really idolized her. He talked about her often to all of his friends. And she was planning on calling him the day before, but her little brother's birthday was the day before Travis died. And just life got in the way, and she didn't make that call. So she blames herself. She feels that if she had called him, that somehow she could have prevented this. But it was just a tragic accident. Kids, unfortunately, at that age think they're invincible and that nothing can hurt them. And a couple hours worth of drinking hard liquor can kill you, and kids need to know that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the guilt, and I think, like you said, I think sometimes we think that won't happen to me, right? Which we've talked about in terms of the teen brain. Some of that is biological, right? And you think, I'm not affecting anybody else. This is my body. This is my choice. But, just hearing your story and talking about your daughter and your other son and how deeply you guys have been impacted and carry this. And,
And I was convinced that Travis's little brother, Joe, who's now almost 18, wouldn't get into alcohol because of what happened to his big brother. And of course, at the time, at 10, he said as much. But here we are, 16, 17, and coming on 18, and he has gotten a hold of alcohol and is drinking with his friends. So it has to be a peer pressure thing.
Yeah. Right. So you can be armed with that knowledge, but then you do have to navigate that part. And you and I have talked about that too. I think that's so important, that having the knowledge is one thing, and going through a loss may not necessarily buffer you or prevent you from also engaging in that behavior, because your peers are doing it. And, we've talked a lot about refusal skills, and we'll talk more about that throughout the school year, how you get out of situations, how you refuse, preparing yourself before you go out, right, to a party, not thinking that you maybe necessarily are going to binge drink or smoke marijuana or do something, but sometimes these things unfold, right? And then how do you get out of that situation?
Having a conversation with your parents beforehand and coming up with a code word to help get you out of a situation without you looking uncool is a great way to do that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about, your parents a lot of times can be that person, but if you want to do that proactively before you're in the moment, you're not necessarily going to make that safe choice because you're going to be nervous. Oh, what's going to happen to me at home? I'm going to get in trouble. And then, like a Travis situation could easily happen. You're at a party. You don't expect to have your driver. You had a designated driver. They now started drinking, right? Or you pretend you were preparing to stay overnight, right? Sleepovers, and everyone's drinking. And then the police show up, they break up the party. They don't necessarily ensure that people are sober driving out of there. People panic and they start driving under the influence. You could easily jump in a car with somebody to try to get out of there. They're under the influence. and lead to an arrest situation or an accident.
An accident, yes.
And the impact of drinking too, you also have in your brochure that you've given to the kids over the years, just some of the health effects on binge drinking. Everything then leading up to an actual alcohol overdose or death that Travis experienced. And there's things that stand out to you, Jana, with that. And maybe I think sometimes people don't realize, like, if you just go to bed, that your blood alcohol content stays the same, right? But it actually continues to rise once you're sleeping, even if you stopped drinking.
Yeah, it does continue to rise before it starts to fall, and it's usually for every ounce you drink, it takes an hour to get out of your system. So, some of the dangers, in addition to, vomiting, having to have your stomach pumped, sexual assault, especially for girls, you're so out of it that you don't realize what could be happening to you. Someone could take advantage of that, unfortunately.
Absolutely. That's always something that I really think is important to talk about in this lesson, because unfortunately we do hear quite a bit of those scenarios where alcohol is involved and there's a sexual assault situation. And I think you've shared too with Travis that he was worried about two of his friends, right, that had gotten drunk, and people wanted to leave them.
And just leave them in a field all alone. Yeah, I was upset with him because I could tell he was drunk when I heard him speak, but he stood by his conviction and absolutely said, we can't leave these two girls here. We have to protect them.
Yeah, and that really goes to that point. A lot of times there aren't people like that that are looking out for somebody's best interests, right? They're looking for a moment to take advantage, or
100% out for themselves. I got to get out of here because I'm afraid to get arrested. But
right,
that's no longer the case anymore with the new laws in New York State. Is that just New York State, or is that countrywide?
It's state by state, but I think a lot of states do have it. But Jana's mentioning, I think this might be a good way to kind of like come to an end and talk about the 911 Good Samaritan law. And we do have that protection in New York, but it is good to look at, if you're traveling in another state, does that apply? But for us, there is that protection. So any type of overdose, whether that's alcohol, opiates, benzodiazepines, any drug that maybe a friend or someone at a party is overdosing, and you call 911, you're protected from legal action. You won't get arrested. They may confiscate the drugs that are there, and yes, it's underage drinking. You won't get in trouble in that regard. But with parents, obviously they'll be called, and there's that piece, which is why I think we always talk about, have these conversations now with mom or dad, your guardian. Maybe it's an older brother or sister that still lives at home that might be a reliable person for you too.
Yeah, and I've always said, after our very first class together, and when you asked the kids what they would do if they were in a situation where their people were drinking, and the one boy said he would leave, and then I suggested not to leave and just stay there. Be the babysitter, be their guardian angel, keep an eye on them and make sure that they don't get in a situation where Travis did, where there was nobody there to help him in time.
Right. So that, I know that for you, just thinking about, sometimes we just think, oh, they need to sleep it off, right? They're just drunk. They need to sleep it off. And they're actually going into respiratory depression. And,
and if they're vomiting and they're laying down, they're going to choke on their vomit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we really just think, like you said, I think sometimes it goes back to, we're invincible, we're okay. Oh, it's just alcohol. They didn't mix it with anything else, right? And it's certainly not the case in terms of overdose. Yeah.
Your body can only handle so much. And his death certificate said malignant arrhythmia, which is medical talk for his heart stopped. His heart could not take the amount of alcohol he ingested in such a short time.
And I think that's true. You know, a lot of times we hear, you know, cirrhosis of the liver and liver disease. And I think sometimes kids think, oh, that's the only part of the body that's affected, right?
Yeah.
And as you have in your flyer, the high blood pressure, stroke, cardiovascular disease, or cardiovascular arrest, right?
Yeah. Like most of those things listed there are more long-term things that happen after you've been drinking for a long period of time. But yeah, your heart can stop in a split second and not start back up, unfortunately.
And I think last, just my appreciation for you, and we're really trying to challenge the stigma around addiction and mental health. And sometimes it's really hard, right, for parents to acknowledge if they've lost a child to any type of overdose or, you know, alcohol poisoning situation. And that has a lot of impact on our community too, right, when we're not discussing it, but it can be so hard.
One of Travis's friends started some huge Facebook argument with me because he didn't like that I posted this brochure. He didn't want any of his friends to know how Travis died. And I mean, I didn't understand that. At first, you know, it was like, this is the way I grieve and the way I give back to the community. But you should, you see this, you've read it, you came to my very first talk, and you saw how helpful it was. And why wouldn't you want to make something positive out of what happened to such a good friend of yours?
It does, so I was saying, because so many people, it's let's hide, it's secrecy, right? There's denial, maybe their own behavior, and then they have to look at that, right? And sometimes that's really hard to do.
Yeah. The same kid, when I posted Travis's driver's license that said he was 21, which showed up in the mail after he died, he wanted me to give it to him because he wasn't 21 yet either, and wanted to be able to buy alcohol himself. So at that point, certainly he had not learned any lessons yet.
Yeah. Well, I just, again, thank you so much for being here and sharing this, and hopefully very soon in the future, we'll be able to do this again in person.
Yeah.
And you're going to share this brochure electronically with me too, so I can send that out to all the kids.
Yeah. And this is my favorite picture of Travis. I mean, this is all we have left of him. It was very difficult over the last 8 years to see his friends graduate from college, get married, have kids, and all those things are never going to happen for him. So, I mean, when you choose to drink alcohol in excess, I mean, I'm an adult, I do drink occasionally, once in a while, you know, a drink with a glass of wine with dinner, but certainly not the entire bottle. But when you choose to drink too much that your body can handle, you're going to end up missing out on all the awesome things in life.